Welcome to episode 16 of Tales from the Bridge. Okay, so Kevin, Marty, and myself sat down with Adrian Tchaikovsky recently. Yet another great conversation with an amazing author. If you are not familiar with Adrian's work, please go check out his sci-fi and his fantasy. It's just great stuff. So, all right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
We're really honored to be here. I was blown away by the first book that I read by you, which was Children of Time. A friend of mine sent it to me and just said, "This is the book. Read this, you'll love it." And I have now been doing that to all of my friends. I've been imposing it on every science fiction reader I know, and uniformly, it is such a well-loved book. So I'm super honored and really excited to talk to you today. I might just introduce you a little bit. You're quite a prolific author. I believe I've counted over 22 books that you have published now. Is that about correct, or is there more?
I suppose it probably confirms the prolific in that I say I've kind of lost track of how many books.
Oh, well, there you go. Exactly.
It's worth noting that 10 of them are one series and 4 of them are adjuncts to that one series, so that kind of shrinks the output a bit. But
Right. So this is the Shadows of the Apt series, which I believe was the series with which you burst onto the scene. This is a fantasy series that is it true that this sort of was inspired and came from your LARPing days or your experience, or is that a more general thing?
So not LARPing. It derives directly from a tabletop campaign I ran back in university. So a good 10 years or more before the actual books were written.
Oh, interesting.
Mostly because I'd been trying to get when before Shadows of the Apt got picked up, I'd been trying to get published for a very long time, at least 15 years of rejections. So I thought I will have basically one last go at getting into print, and I want to give it the absolute best shot. So what are the setting I know really, really well? And one of the advantages to running a role-playing game campaign, especially with a fairly fractious and wide-ranging group of players, you get to know the world extremely well. And so that was why I picked that setting for the series. And as it turned out, that worked.
Excellent. Wow. So you're 10 books deep, I believe, in that series you said, plus 4 that spun off from that. And then you jumped into sci-fi, I believe, with Children of Time, which won the Arthur C. Clarke Award in 2016. And you've also won the BSFA Award, the British Science Fiction Association Award for Best Novel for Children of Ruin, which was the sequel to Children of Time, as well as I see the British Fantasy Award for The Tiger and the Wolf. So you're quite a decorated author, and and your latest book,
as of this year, the Golden Dragon of Montenegro.
Which
wow. is surely the most fantastic name for an award I've ever come across.
That's great. And your latest book is called Shards of Earth, which is it seems the beginning of a space opera. There certainly seems to be more the expectation for more books coming out of that. I finished it this morning, and I've been reading it on my vacation in Jasper National Park and British Columbia here. So it was a great vacation read for me, and I think we're going to want to talk about that.
Indeed. In fact, it's also the book for our book club this month, this podcast being a book club. So there's going to be a number of us who are going to be discussing it this month. So we're excited about that as well. And so happy that you happen to be here coinciding with it, being the topic of our discussion for our book club.
Mm-hmm. So I do have to jump in with one first question that has, of course, been on my mind ever since I discovered your books. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, the great Russian composer. Any relation?
I don't think so. So, my actual name is Tchaikovsky, but it's spelt very differently. It's got the Polish spelling, which starts CZ, which was also, I believe, the way that the composer's, I think, grandfather would have spelt it. So it's just when you go from the the spelling we have for the composer's name is it gets very complicated. It's a Roman alphabet transliteration of the Cyrillic alphabet version. Right. I think modern musicologists even spell it completely differently now. It's a very common name, though. It's not quite Smith in kind of Slavic countries, but it's sufficiently common that the odds of there being any kind of familial connection are tiny.
Gotcha. Well, I'm Polish too myself. I was born in Poland in Białystok, so that's very interesting to me. And I've got a CZ in my own name at the end. Yeah. You have written a lot of fantasy, and now recently you're writing more sci-fi. I was wondering if you could tell us how your fantasy background influences your science fiction writing, and especially in relation to this latest book, Shards of Earth, which, as you said, is sort of departs from the tradition of hard sci-fi that we saw in Children of Time and Children of Ruin, and this is more in a sort of space opera or science fantasy sort of tradition. Is that a conscious thing that you've done, or why don't you tell us a little about that?
It very much so. If anyone has read Children of Ruin will notice there is an awful lot of going from place to place within one solar system, because I wanted it to be limited by the sort of travel that the characters would have available, the sort of technology, which basically means because space, as Adam says, is very big, it takes a very long time to get anywhere. And therefore, when I want to write my next book, I thought I'm going to write a book that has faster than light travel, so people can just go places very quickly, because that is narratively extremely convenient. Which basically meant a space opera, because faster than light travel is almost certainly not a thing that will ever happen. And I kind of touched on the Alcubierre drive in Children of Ruin, which is I think one of the only kind of models that doesn't break relativity that people have of getting from place to place faster than light does. Because I am a very, very in-depth world builder, and I always start with the world, the idea of faster than light travel then kind of became the entire focus of the book. So as you'll know, if you've read Shards of Earth, the travel through unspace is very intricately tied up with the architects and the central character Idris, and that's all. The whole mechanism of it is basically the spine of the book's concept, because I can't basically leave well enough alone when I'm making up a universe. So that was kind of where it came from. But certainly the idea of being able to write a science fiction setting where I didn't have to worry quite so much about getting angry letters from physicists, was very attractive, and hopefully it still all hangs together and it still feels coherent and realistic. And this is actually where we touch on the fantasy, because building a fantasy world, the Shadows of the Outworld or any of the other ones I've dealt with, obviously you're not necessarily saying, well, I need it to be bound by real physics, because if you want people to fly, they can fly. If you want them to cast fireballs out of their hands, they can. But it's the idea of getting that kind of consistent tone and expectation for the reader, so that it doesn't happen that in the penultimate chapter, someone suddenly does a magical thing that no one has ever done before just to get them out of a tight spot. And you do occasionally see that, and as a reader, it's never terribly satisfying. Mm-hmm. You need to feel that not necessarily that the rules are the rules of the real world, but that the rules are at least there, and they're not going to just suddenly change because the writer finds it convenient for them to do so. And making a fantasy world and making a less hard science fiction universe basically kind of sit on at different points on a single continuum for that. They're not particularly different exercises.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Interesting. And do you get angry letters from physicists?
I've had some very nice letters from physicists. I mean, I've got a bit of a science background myself. It brings me a great deal of joy if I can create, a science fiction universe like that with Children of Time, where I've got things. So, I've got accelerated evolution. I've got, a giant spider civilization. I think it's not much of a spoiler to say. I think it's pretty much what most people know about the book that have ever heard of it. And I can, I get messages from actual scientists, entomologists, spider experts saying this is really good. This all seems to work. This feels real. I mean, it's a bit when I was there's a lot of aerial combat in Shadows of the Alps, both sort of people flying around and flying machines. There's an awful lot of steampunk stuff. One of my proudest moments as a writer was I got an email from an actual military combat pilot saying this, the combat scenes feel very, very real, and they work for me as a pilot very well. And getting that kind of nod from someone who really knows what they're talking about is always an enormous, is always enormously flattering as a writer. Also, I mean, there's just a lot of writers. For a lot of writers, the distinctions between is it hard science fiction, is it space opera, whatever, are not terribly meaningful. I suspect they are probably right in that. I definitely have a bit of a mental block where, to me, I kind of need to know where I am when I'm writing. I need to absolutely locate myself and know what kind of distance I'm going from my understanding, imperfect as it might be, of physics, chemistry, biology, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Does Avrana Kern have your dream job? Is that the fate that you wish you could experience? Because it's, even Senkovi in Children of Ruin is kind of frustrated that Kern gets all the fun. I think it's something like that. Do you want to be out there? Is this something you'd love to be a part of?
Oh God, I always, whenever I feel a character is getting a bit too sort of self-inserty and a bit too much of a Mary Sue, and Avrana Kern was certainly in danger of that, I do try and make them as unpleasant as possible, just so I don't, that I can get out of any kind of narrative difficulties that can cause. So, Avrana Kern builds worlds. I guess the thing is her main contribution to Children of Time is kind of getting it wrong, though, as well. So possibly that's a different kind of self-insert.
Right. Well, you do. You certainly do a lot with bugs. Shadows of the Apt is a world built around these insectoid-type humans or tribes, and Children of Time is, as you said, now famously about spiders. And Shards of Earth even has an unkillable lobster-human hybrid of some sort. So where does this entomological interest come from, and can you comment on why you use this theme so extensively?
Yeah, so this is... there are three answers to this question. All of which are partially true. There is the literary answer, which is basically there is a long tradition, especially in Central and Eastern European literature, of using insects as a window onto human nature. There's the Chapek's insect play, there's Pelavin, there's Kafka's Metamorphosis, for that matter. The idea... because insects tend to draw a certain reaction from people, they are actually a very useful way of putting human nature under the microscope. The human reason is I really like insects. I have always absolutely liked insects. They've just been my thing. I was a very, very sort of weird and disaffected child. I tended towards liking the things that didn't seem to have other people liking them. I liked reptiles, I liked bats and octopi, and I absolutely like insects and spiders and anything like that. In the same way that when I was watching Star Wars, I liked the aliens. I didn't really care much about the human characters and all their struggles. It was the aliens and the monsters and all that sort of stuff was very much my thing. And in my kind of my play as a child and in my reimaginings, the aliens are the central characters. And so beyond that, though, one of the big things about Children of Time is it is absolutely a book about empathy. And this is actually a thing. When I got the Clark Award, this was actually the main thing I was saying in my acceptance is it's a book about empathy. It's a book about looking at the other and seeing that the other is also us, and there is nothing more other than spiders. There's a recent film actually that makes this case about rats, but I think spiders have the greater claim to be the most despised thing, because you post a picture, anyone posts a picture up on Facebook or whatever, or Twitter, of a spider, someone in the comments will basically say, "You must burn your house now because it has a spider in it," and that's just this ludicrous overreaction. Especially, I mean, it's different elsewhere, and my God, it's different in Australia. But in Britain, there are no dangerous spiders at all. There are not really any dangerous sort of invertebrates in the same way that there are in some of the countries. And it's worth noting that most other countries that actually have, say, poisonous spiders, scorpions, whatever, are a lot more chill about the whole business. Certainly than we are in the UK. So spiders have a really bad rap. And if I can write a book that gets people to sympathize with and root for the spiders, that was kind of the win condition. It seems to have worked out that way. I mean, mostly because I have a finger on the scales all the way through the book, kind of pushing them towards that. But even so, that was the challenge. Can I get people to like spiders? And
you absolutely succeeded in that. Yeah, that was my experience, and I think everybody's experience that I know. And reading reviews online, this is what people say too. That they're rooting for the spiders at the end. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, Children of Time was the perfect pure SF novel. It had big ideas, characters, new frontiers, but again, ultimately this moral tale about something fundamental to the human condition. And like you say, that's about empathy. So you did try to do this from the beginning. Was that sort of your goal, was to sort of embarrass Homo sapiens for our self-flattering narratives about how empathetic we are, and then suddenly we're outdone by the animal that most people hate?
I think that would, certainly the idea of again, it's using the insect or the spider as a lens on the human condition, but in this case, yes, rather than sort of taking the metamorphosis route, is actually doing it by providing sort of heroic spiders as a morally viable alternative, I suppose.
You mentioned that you've always been interested in the aliens perspective, and certainly that's what comes out from your writing. You're known for writing about very non-humanoid aliens and non-humanoid perspectives and non-human intelligence. So why is that such a strong theme in your writing? Is there a message here that you're trying to deliver to the world today, the contemporary audiences?
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. You've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune into 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
I guess that primarily it's interesting because it's a theme in my books because it's a thing that interests me. It is the whole idea of science fiction is the idea of pushing those frontiers, and one of the great frontiers is that of intelligence. It's finding and depicting an intelligence that is not human in a way that a human reader can understand it. And I find the idea of there being other thinking creatures endlessly fascinating, both in the sense that I think a lot of recent animal behavioral science has shown that animals think a lot more and in many more complex ways than was previously believed to be the case. And then, the idea of what an artificial sort of human created mind or an human uplifted mind might be like, all the way through to what an actual alien mind would be like. I think it is one of the great sort of topics that science fiction likes to get its teeth into, and it's certainly the one that has always interested me the most. And yeah, I mean, beyond that, I think it very much just goes to it's not the human characters in any kind of thing that tend to interest me. So hence, when my own work comes around, I'm always looking at pushing that envelope, really, looking at where I can take it next to kind of bring a new and unique point of view to something.
And you mentioned that the two parts of that, one is non-human intelligence and exploring that, but the other side of it was, how do you make that accessible to a human audience? Because there's all sorts of really interesting alien consciousness and intelligences out there, but how do we make it so that we want to read it? Is that something that how do you manage that?
Frank, it doesn't help much to say it, but that's the real trick, to be honest. And I suspect there is kind of like a holy grail narrative still waiting to be written, where the point of view is from something genuinely, completely alien, and yet it's brought home in a way that can be empathized with. And I think with a lot of my writing, I'm trying to inch closer to that, and I'm certainly not there yet. And even with Children of Time, for example, we're still dealing with a creature that is our next, our near cousin compared to something that had evolved on another world, because we share a certain amount of world history and genetic compatibility with a spider, however much we may not want that to be the case. As far as actual techniques go, I tend to do. I think you can generally strip back to common ground. Certainly when you're working with something from Earth, you can strip back to common ground quite easily, and then build up from there, working with things need energy intake, things will get hungry, things want to survive to reproduce, therefore things will feel fear and pain. You have a certain amount of commonality that's probably shared by pretty much any kind of certainly sort of mobile animal life in Earth's history. Beyond that, for that, your low-end commonality is there. Your high-end commonality is we share the same universe. So once you start getting an understanding of how the universe works, there's an argument that you start to converge at that point as well. And that's when you see kind of the spiders communicating with Avarana Kern or communicating with the humans, that you're working at that end of, if you assume, as not everyone assumes, that maths is a constant, that numbers are a constant, that you can basically reduce communication to numbers and work with that as your kind of Rosetta Stone. That also gives you that common point. And in the interim, you look at the thing's individual biology, its sort of evolutionary history, its especially things like its available senses. Because that, if you're trying to describe the world from the creature's perspective, working with a non-human sensorium is an extremely good way of getting over the inhumanity of the narrative perspective, whilst also making it fairly, not sort of ridiculously confusing.
Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorite parts in Children of Time is how you develop the legs tapping right on webs, and this is how they communicate, and it was just really brilliantly done.
I mean, honestly, the spiders are our next neighbors compared to the in Children of Ruin I do octopuses, and that very nearly broke me, to be honest, because they are very cognitively different to humans in a way that the spiders aren't.
Yeah. Well, is it octopuses or octopi? I have no idea what to say when I talk about that.
Well, I mean, in the book, I do octopuses, octopi, and octopodes.
I noticed that.
Which I just have enormous. I mean, my understanding is that octopuses is correct.
Oh,
octopodes might be correct, but frankly, comes across as very pretentious. Frankly, an octopi is probably incorrect, but sounds better.
Huh.
And so I did kind of cheat and find opportunities for different characters to use different plural forms throughout the book, just so I could have my cake and eat it.
Yeah, excellent.
Neat.
I love how empathy is very important to you, and that's something I didn't really think about too much, and up until you mentioning it now, and it really comes up with Shards of Earth as well. Like every character you can empathize. Well, if you have the ability to, it makes the story so much better. And these characters are so lovable. I am blown away by one simple device you used with the character Rollo, and how he called his crew, his children, and his daughter, and the power behind that was like, I have chills saying it right now to you, Adrian. It's super. The power is unbelievable. Was that, did you understand the power of that simple device when you wrote that, or did that come to you as you were writing? Because Rollo, I mean, what a character, and I hope we're not done with him.
It's nice that that's come across. I mean, I guess you never know how that sort of thing is going to land when you're writing it. It's, you know, it's one of those ways, you know, giving characters unique speech patterns is obviously a good way of, if you have quite a large cast, of making sure people always know who's talking and getting people up to speed with who's who very quickly. But it's he's a character I became very fond of as the book went on.
Right?
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it strikes me that that your focus on the alien and the other and other perspectives and other intelligences, right? That is a way of talking about empathy. That is a way of creating empathy, right? You're allowing people to expose themselves to completely different ways of thinking, or another person's way of thinking that might be completely different from yours, but comprehensible. And so now we can empathize. Now we can have sympathy for other kinds of creatures, right? And this is a great moral sort of core to your books and lesson for today's world, certainly. Speaking of characters in Shards of Earth, one of my favorite characters is the master knife-wielding lawyer who fights in the tradition of these medieval judicial duels. And I know that you spent some time practicing law. So are you drawing on your own experience there?
That would be,
have you fought any knife fights in that time?
That would be wishful thinking, I think. But yeah, no, that was... I'm not even sure where that came from. And I wanted a legally trained character, really, just so I could have a bit of fun with my sort of former profession in the book. Right. I think she comes over very well. I also, in the same way as I want people to empathize with spiders, I thought having a kind of an honest and principled lawyer was a bit of a novel approach in the book. The knife fighting, I'm not really... I think I was just... When I was working on just my loose sketch of Scintilla, which is the planet that Chris trained on, I just had the idea of, well, yeah, what if it is dominated by this very sort of, almost sort of, old university, sort of, I mean, in England, we'd say sort of an Oxbridge-style university, which had just kind of stewed in its own traditions for a very long time, until it got to the point where the students were just running around kind of having formal knife duels for some reason completely lost in the mist of time. And so she's kind of come out of that with the legal training, and also the fact that she's very handy with a knife, and B, very much not welcome in a large number of places because she was slightly too handy with a knife, right, at one point. So
yeah. Well, she's a great character, and you're right. There aren't very many, if any, that I can think of, likable lawyers in the space operas I've read. Yeah. Another thing I really love about Shards of Earth is the stakes. The stakes are high, right? And as they tend to be in space opera. And usually the stakes are, the fate of the planet is in somebody's hands, or the fate of the galaxies. And that's still somewhat the case, but I think it's really interesting what you've done here is you've sort of put us on the other side of the apocalypse with Shards of Earth, where the battle for Earth has already been lost. That's sort of in the prologue. And we find ourselves on the other side of this great event where humanity is still surviving, and it's spread onto other planets and colonies, but Earth is gone. So it strikes me that this might give... There's a different story to be told on the other side of the apocalypse than before, as it were. And I'm wondering if you did that consciously, if you've chosen this sort of, post-apocalyptic world to write in, or post, fall of Earth, that there's something different you can do with those kind of stories than with the classic sort of hero tale.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to me just the Earth being threatened with annihilation has been done a lot. I mean, it was done a lot in things like science fiction from the 1950s and probably even before that. The idea that there's an asteroid, there's an alien invasion, there's something which is going to destroy the planet, and you can fight against it or you can evacuate. And all the story has already been told fairly exhaustively. But also, I kind of felt I didn't think I had anything particularly unique to say there. I could have told the story of my particular set of characters doing that, and you get some retrospectives to what was going on during the big war that starts with the destruction of Earth. But it seemed a lot more interesting, honestly, to just wind the clock forwards and look, all right, what if people are still around, like you say, they're scattered over various planets. They've been through this kind of catastrophic, I mean, they call it a war, but I think that's really overstating the case, because through most of that, they're not really able to fight the thing that is coming for them. They can only really delay it so they can get as many people out of the way as possible. And so you have an entire human society that's recovering from basically a cultural PTSD. Mm-hmm. And you see that in a lot of different ways throughout the series, large and small. You see it in the way that the core worlds are kind of reforming and starting to fracture into factions as you get people who are, they're a generation or two down the line from the event of the war. They didn't experience it themselves, and they're basically saying, well, we could have won. We could have fought back. Something kind of sabotaged us to take away our place, and that kind of building kind of cultural movement going on. At the same time, you see in the characters like Rollo and the crew of the Vulture God, the way that absolutely nothing is wasted and everything is ramshackled together, and it's all because you had this long period of time where everyone was basically moving from planet to planet in space. The entire population of humanity was pretty much a refugee effort, and any world could have been next. And so everyone has these habits. No one is without a tool belt. Everyone knows how to fix the atmospheric processes. Even the least technically able character is Chris, the lawyer, and even she has a fair amount of stuff just because that's what you pick up as a human being. It's part of your cultural heritage that you can fix parts of a spaceship, because everyone is. There was a period where everyone had to know these things for the survival of the species. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just looking at it through that lens, especially with where you have a character like Idris who was in the war and is kind of personally carrying all that baggage around firsthand, just gave me a much more interesting canvas to paint than your standard kind of, here is a set of sort of colonial human characters. They live all over the place, and hooray for space.
Can I just ask, with Adrian, with that, you speak very eloquently about the psychology of the nativists, or the Idris, or some of the characters in your stories, and being the author, obviously you have a strong understanding of that. But is it in retrospect, after having written the book, that you have these in-depth ideas of the world that you're building, or do you do? When you do your world building, because I know you put a lot of thought into that, do you do that beforehand and have a complete idea of what the world looks like, or is it in retrospect that you really understand the world?
So under normal circumstances, with all of my work, I start with the world and working out things like who are the factions and what are the main kind of movements and ideas and beliefs and so forth is very much part of what I have nailed down at the beginning of the book, even before I set pen to paper. And in fact, most of who the characters are and most of the detail that goes into the book arises very organically from those original ideas. So yeah, all of that is kind of set up at the beginning, because I find, things do change, ideas do come along during the writing of the book. that require me kind of having to go back and retcon stuff in. But I try and keep that to a minimum because I find the book has a much more coherent feel for me as a writer if everything I'm writing is with the knowledge of how the universe works, basically. It also, on a purely selfish reason, it means that the editing process between first draft and submission is shorter, because I'm not having to go back and rejig a lot of stuff to make up for the ideas I come in with halfway through, if those ideas are all set at the beginning. But that's a writing process thing. Everyone has their own approach to it, and some writers do something similar, I know, and other writers do it, have a completely different, much more free-form process, and it always comes down to whatever works for you.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about, the mechanics of that. Exactly. Where does this world exist ahead of time? Is it all in your head, or do you write it down in this sort of encyclopedic kind of format, or where does it exist exactly?
So I generally start off with like 2 or 3 core ideas that kick around on my head for a while, and they start to gather other kind of orbiting ideas to them, and it all comes together a bit like a solar system. Mm-hmm. Or at least that's a kind of a narratively convenient way of describing the process. And at that point, before I sit down and write the book, I will sit down and spend some time, a couple of weeks at least, just making notes, really. Making notes, ordering things, making lists of stuff, I did, with Shards of Earth, I probably did more formal world building than I'd done for a while, because I actually had a timeline, and that turned out to be enormously useful. Mm-hmm. So the timeline that's at the back of the book was something I ended up referring to an awful lot, because it, especially when you're dealing with characters who have lived much longer than others. Like Idris, for reasons that are disclosed in the book, has been around for quite a long time. So you kind of need to know, well, what has he lived through? What was going on when he was born? How old is Rollo? What has he personally experienced? What does he only know about? And that sort of thing really helped me get behind various of the characters. And so when they, there's a bit, I think, in the first book where they meet the big bad physically for the first time quite late on, and Idris is basically said, well, it's just like in the war. And one of the guys said, yeah, we weren't in the war. Yeah, that was just you. And it's so I probably went a bit more overboard on the for the Shards of Earth setting, but it was the first time I had sat down to write books which were intentionally part of a trilogy or part of a sequence. For quite a while, I've done a lot of standalones, and I've done other books which have had sequels, but the books weren't written with the necessity of there being a sequel. So the sequel would then just, like the Children of Ruin comes along after Children of Time, but Children of Time doesn't necessarily anticipate there being a Children of Ruin. And it's the same with Dogs of War and Bearhead, for example. Mm-hmm. So knowing I was sitting down for a much longer haul than normal, I think meant I did a lot more due diligence on how everything fit together, because I knew I had to keep it fitting together for 3 whole books.
Well, with all that in mind, what you've just told us, Adrian, do you understand, do you see, or do you have a complete story? Do you know how this trilogy of the Shards of Earth ends?
I hope so, because I've delivered it to the publisher. My agent is currently reading the 3rd and final book. So yeah, that's all. But I did. It was the details, especially toward the end, kind of fill in. And one of the things the one thing I really don't nail down is how the book is going to end. I rely on the fact that at the point I get to the end of a book, it has sufficient trajectory and momentum that it tells me how it's going to end itself. For example, when you get to the end of Children of Time, that particular resolution was not planned. That just kind of arose organically out of how things were coming together. It could have gone very differently. And so with Children of Time, with Shards of Earth, I've known what was going on, and I kind of have a reasonable idea of the 3-book arc, although obviously the further it goes in, the less detail I particularly knew, and the more I had Certainly, but writing the third one, I had a lot of very timely revelations about better ways of doing things that I was able to kind of fit in without massively going back and junking huge tracts of stuff I'd already written. But in general, and I've now got to my standard thing where I've forgotten the precise details of the question. But
how's it all in? No.
Yeah, so it's but the overall arc and trajectory of the book was already known to me when I was starting the beginning.
Gotcha. And so when can we expect the second book to come out?
I would imagine the second book is going to be mid next year, and the third book the year after that.
Okay.
So how many words are you writing a day to get these chunky books out so quickly? Because you're really doing them quick, and they're still so good. You're not losing any quality over the quantity.
I mean thank you. It's I generally try out 1,000 to 2,000 words a day, which I think is not a lot. The secret weapon is honestly, I think the level of planning I put into things means that I save time on the editing process. So like I said, my first draft and my submission draft are generally very close. I tend to go through, I always have to prune because I do always overwrite. And then my editors also have to prune because I've still overwritten even when I've submitted. But in general, barring there have been a couple of books where I have got it wrong, and that's been a real pain, frankly, having to go back and rewrite large chunks because it's not hanging together. But most of the time I write from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. I go back and sort of correct errors and tighten up the writing, and then I submit. And that's where I'm kind of appearing to be an enormously productive writer. It's more that the stuff I'm producing is stuff I tend to get to keep, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is a practiced skill, and having published many books, I suspect you're probably quite good at the process.
I'm still learning. I'm sure I'm still learning, but yes, and I think what you really build up is you get a much better sense on the fly of whether something is working or whether it isn't. Because obviously, the quicker you can listen to that little voice in your head that tells you it isn't, you need to do something to make it fly properly, the less you have to redo.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really that's really interesting for me to hear that the end of Children of Time sort of came to you at the end, because that is one of my favorite endings of all the books I've ever read, I think, in science fiction. I love how that comes together.
Agreed.
My experience of reading Children of Time was the entire time I'm just, how is he going to do it? How is he going to make this work out? What's going to happen? And you just tease it right till the last few pages, and it all comes together.
Yeah, well, that was also my feeling when I was writing it. So there we go.
Which is quite stunning. Just stunning that it really was the last couple of pages. Unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And
well,
speaking of ending,
one day I'll get to the last chapter and I will not know how it's supposed to go, and that will be dreadful. But so far, it's not failed me.
Well, at the end of Children of Ruin, I believe you also dropped a little hint that we had covered arachnid and cephalopod intelligence, and next was going to be corvid intelligence. Am I right about that? Is there going to be another children book?
There is. So I've kind of been asked not to say too much about this by the publisher, because it's still the actual publication is going to be a way down the line, and they want to kind of build things up there. But there is, and it is written, and it is with the publisher. So,
amazing! Oh, that's the best news I've heard.
Great.
That's great. Amazing. Wow. And they're going to just make us wait, huh? All right.
Well, they know they have us, so why not stretch that out?
You got so much stuff in the pike, you could just go on vacation for a few years, Adrian.
Well, the downside of all of this is my limit is about 2 weeks, absolutely stretching as far as it can go before I will go completely nuts if I'm not writing something.
Huh.
So, and I was on holiday last week with my family, and I got a fairly solid 2,000 words a day done over the course of the holiday, because that tends to mean I can enjoy the rest of the time. But it's once I've kind of ticked that box, say I have done a thing, I have accomplished something today, and that's frankly not terribly mentally healthy. I think as a position to be in, but that's kind of what I live with.
But what if you were to go back to tabletop and create a world that way? Would that fill the gaps in your mind instead of a novel?
Well, I'm still doing tabletop gaming.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. Frankly, that's the hobby I've never put down since kind of secondary school, to be honest. I'm still playing. I'm still playing with a number of people I was playing with back when I was sort of 16, 17. Wow. So I think the problem is you get very used to writing for a particular type of consumption. And the world building is one thing, but it's the actual actually turning out the words of prose is not a thing that the tabletop gaming would probably give me.
Right.
What games do you play? What are your favorite games?
Oh, look, so I'm very much sort of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm a huge convert to the current edition of that. I'm also I've become extremely fond of the Powered by the Apocalypse series of games, just because it's so very versatile and all the various different hacks people have made of that. I'm currently there are currently 2 games I've got that I'm desperate to try and get an opportunity to play, which are relatively new out. One of them is Good Society, which is a Jane Austen role-playing game, which looks enormous fun, and the other one's literally just arrived from Kickstarter called Wander Home, which is kind of small life story in a fantasy world. So it's completely non-conflict, and it's basically they're the group of people, they're wandering from place to place, and it's not so much what they're doing, it's more the people they are and the way they are being. Also, everyone an animal, and all the kind of non-sentient animals are all giant insects. So obviously there's a fair amount of kind of feeling that it was kind of made with me in mind.
Well, that's perfect.
So would that make you the dungeon master then, or would you prefer to be the player there? Or
I'd quite like to play in that one, although it's kind of set up so you can pass the hat around the table for running it, or even just sort of run it as a group. Although I've got to say I've never done that, and I'm not quite sure how that would work unless you had a very very comfortable group of players, all of whom had kind of had a bit of running experience.
And then what about the live action? Is that something, obviously with the current situation the last couple of years, that's slowed down for in-person meetings, but is that something you still this past summer, have you been out there doing that, or is that continuing?
No, I've not done that for I'd not done that for quite a few years before the whole situation arose. It's partly getting old. It's a matter of time. The sort of LARP systems that I was very fond of, you frankly have to really devote quite a lot of time to, in that. So if they have like 4 weekend meetings in a year and you don't go to all 4, you're kind of missing out on the big political developments and the big factional stuff that is going on. There was a system I was very fond of called Maelstrom that I kind of played in from start to finish over about 10 years, which I think felt like the acme of my role-playing experience, and the more combat-heavy one I did before then, called Curious Pastimes. But I think that kind of spoiled me for casual LARPing, I think, and with my various kind of writing and family demands on my time, it just wasn't really possible to give it the attention I felt it deserved.
So, what book did you have with you on your vacation? What are you reading?
I'm currently reading Simon Jimenez's Vanished Birds. I've just got right to the end of that. It's one of the books on the this year's Clark shortlist.
Okay.
And then I've literally just, where is it? Stars and Bones. Gareth Powell is my next read. I've just had an advanced proof of that through, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Nice. And I can't help but notice the hardcover, the beautiful hardcover edition of Dune behind you. Is Dune Is that the crux of science fiction to you? Is that something that you?
I don't know. I mean, I went when I was kind of trying to get published. I did go through phases of writing like various authors. Never actually Herbert. Of the books that people will tend to think of as the classic science fiction books, I think Dune was probably the one I enjoyed most when I was younger. Mm-hmm. I'm also aware it's incredibly problematic in a number of ways. So there are things like I mean, possibly most obviously its attitude towards homosexuality, which is really, really reactionary, frankly. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I mean, there's a lot of phenomenal universe building that goes on in Dune, and I think it's one of those books that casts an enormous shadow over the genre. A lot of the other sort of classic science fiction authors, I've not really read a great deal of, to be honest. I mean, I've read some Clarke, I've read some Asimov and so forth, but I've certainly not gone through the whole canon. I've not really read much Heinlein or anything like that. Most of the science fiction I'm really attached to is actually much more sort of recent vintage. I guess I think the author that probably had the most influence on me, mostly just by kind of setting up a target of kind of literary quality and complexity that frankly I'm never going to actually hit, is probably Gene Wolfe.
Yeah, another disciple of Gene Wolfe.
Oh yeah, I mean I love Wolfe's writing, and one of the reasons I think I really enjoy his writing is because I know I'm never going to get anywhere like that. It's completely his own thing. I don't need to worry about kind of competing with Gene Wolfe or anything daft like that, because he's completely unique as a writer.
Yeah,
interesting. And so that leads me to ask. Excuse me, we spoke to David Zindel. I'm not sure if you've heard of David Zindel.
Neverness. I love Neverness. It's a great book.
Yeah. Oh well, that's exciting to hear that you've read him. Excuse me. But we spoke to David, and again, I think that's what Marty was referring to. Another disciple of Gene Wolfe. We love David Zindel and his work, and Neverness was just beautiful. So that's nice to hear that you're familiar with his work and that you appreciate him, because we do as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So just following up on that thread, in terms of contemporary authors, who are your favorites? Who do you think is doing great work today in science fiction?
Okay, I mean, I want to take away the idea of favorites, because I always forget someone whenever I'm doing this. So I mean, authors I really rate, and authors I will always kind of go and look out their next work. I mean, I've mentioned Gareth Powell already. Emma Newman, her fantasy and science fiction is absolutely superb. Aliette de Bodard. I mean, Arkady Martine. I've read her. Is it With Memory Called Emperor and Desolation Called Peace? Is that the second one?
Yes.
Yes.
Read that one. That's a superb book.
Yes, it is.
I'm trying to think, who else have I read recently? I love Chris Beckett. Chris Beckett's Dark Eden, which won the Clarks a couple of years before Children of Time, was a huge inspiration for me. I suspect without that book, I probably wouldn't have written Children of Time at all. I've been reading fantasy for a long time, and that was a science fiction book that basically reminded me, this is the sort of sci-fi that I really enjoyed, and the sort of world building, the sort of that balance of imagination and real feeling science that is really quite unique to that corner of the genre.
Great. You must really enjoy Naomi Novik too. Then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And although I mean, I've read. Has she written sci-fi as well? Because I think I've only read her
Shards of Earth.
No, that's my one.
That is.
I mean, the Broken Earth.
Oh no, that's N.K. Jemisin.
N.K. Jemisin I love. Yeah. So I mean, I've read Novik, but obviously I've read her the Temeraire books, and and her kind of folktale work. But yes, no, N.K. Jemisin is absolutely superb.
Yeah, she really is. Also, I read something that reminded me of your work recently by Sue Burke, Semiosis.
Semiosis, yes. I've read it, and it's one of the books I will always point people at when they're looking for something that is, in that sort of same sort of region of the genre as Children of Time. It's absolutely that it's her take on that, her own non-human perspective is spot on, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really neat because she does exactly this sort of thing with a biology-heavy sci-fi and thinking about other kinds of intelligences. And in her book, it's intelligent plants, which I've never seen, I don't think, in any other books. And it's a fascinating perspective. It's also interesting that compared with your books, one of the things she does is explore what happens when humans go to colonize a world and there's already intelligent life there, or any life. But in this case, it takes them a while to find out that it's intelligent life too, and how do you deal with that? It's a good commentary on, I guess, or counterpoint maybe to colonization.
And just to jump over to film a little bit, Adrian, were the 80s was that a big decade for you for film, being a young man and getting into for me, it was Dark Crystal was just like the ultimate world building. Are films like that important to you? Or was Star Wars more important? Or did you like the fantasy or the science fiction more when you were a kid growing up in that decade?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is with there are a lot of fantasy films from that era that I'm now kind of fond of, and they're all kind of, well, this is a fun film, except, mostly, but there's no budget.
Yeah.
So when we're looking sort of Hawk the Slayer, or Krull, or
I love
Lady
Krull.
Hawk. I love it, but you kind of feel it's.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think Krull's main problem is that Star Wars was so successful they kind of had to turn it into a semi-science fiction movie, and I'm not entirely sure that does it any favors. But right. There's always a but with that kind of the fantasy films of that period. So, because it was the period that science fiction was really, really, really taking off. I mean, there are a number of authors at the time who were wanting effectively to write fantasy, but had to convert it over to being science fiction for it to sell. I mean, Anne McCaffrey, her Dragon Riders books were originally a fantasy series, but she was worked with the two chaps who did the Science of the Discworld books, who gave her kind of scientific framework for the dragons and the thread and all that stuff that's going on in the books.
Neat.
But so it was very much a science fiction. I mean, the Dark Crystal was from my perspective, the Dark Crystal was great because, again, you have a world with no actual humans in it, and which was, I think, an incredibly bold move at the time, and I'm kind of amazed they did it. Sure. Possibly there are other examples where that's happened, but I can't think of any off the top of my head where you just don't get any kind of connection to humans, whether real humans or fantastical humans. And in a lot of those films, it wasn't just humans being shoehorned in, but it was actually, here are some humans from Earth getting shoehorned in because we somehow our viewers or whatever are too unimaginative to be able to cross that gap without someone literally carrying a flag all the way over there. The other one that really worked for me was Battle Beyond the Stars, the Roger Corman Magnificent Seven in space film.
I absolutely love that film. I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's so no one knows it.
It's one. I think it's a bit of a cult film. It turns up every so often on online in lists and things like that. The thing that worked for me in that is one of the hero characters who gets recruited to save the village/planet is Cayman of the Lambda Zone, who is a scary as hell lizard man monster who is still one of the good guys. And as a kid, it was that revelation of, actually, no, you can have a creature that looks like that and it's a hero, and it can be a good hero, and you kind of have permission to create those characters, and that was just this huge. It was just opening that door to a path that probably leads a straight line from there to Children of Time. It's the idea of the outsider as hero.
We're talking to Peter Watson, author, and Neil Blomkamp, the filmmaker, tomorrow. And I had Battle Beyond the Stars on a list of questions I wanted to talk to Neil about, and I took it off thinking he's not going to know that movie. And so I got to say, I'm super happy to hear that. And I love film scores, and that was James Horner's first score, and it still stands out as a fantastic one.
I have some parts of the soundtrack still on my phone.
Excellent. Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, really happy about that.
Well, Adrian, you've told us that you're way ahead of where we knew. You've finished the children series. You finished the Shards of Earth trilogy even before the second one comes out. Well, what's next? What are you working on now?
What else is in the pipeline? I have been writing a series of novellas for the publisher Rebellion, and we've got a couple of those yet to come out.
Is this the Expert System?
No. Those are my working with several publishers. Those the Expert System books are with Tor.com.
Okay.
So the most recent Rebellion ones, there's been Firewalkers, and there's been my time travel book, One Day All This Will Be Yours. But there are 4 of those out so far. They're all kind of independent stories, but they clump loosely by theme, effectively. There's a book, there are 2 of those left to come out. The next one, which is Ogres, which kind of goes with Ironclads and Firewalkers as my kind of future dystopia books.
Okay.
Beyond that, I'm currently working on my first fantasy book for a while. For Head of Zeus, currently untitled, but I'm doing kind of gritty in city level
Head of Zeus.
Yes.
I just happen to have this on my. This is a Cory Doctorow.
I've read that one. It's very good. But yes, so I'm kind of trying to write a book about, well, what if there was a fantasy book plot thing going on, but the actual book is about people trying not to be any part of it and just kind of keep out of the way, and all the little people who normally just get squished during kind of big fantasy or big political conflicts, just trying to stay out from underfoot. Or at least that's it's quite early days with it, but that's kind of the general idea.
Interesting. I have to ask, I watched a few interviews of you doing my homework before this, and you mentioned at some point that the next book you were writing on at that time, and I don't really know when it was going to be called The Brain Garden. Is that supposed to be Shards of Earth, or is that...
No, The Brain Garden turned out... the title did not survive contact with my publishers. That's actually The Doors of Eden. That was so that was the book that I had out last year, which is it's out in the States and in the UK, which is my kind of parallel worlds thriller sort of a book, with kind of multiple evolutionary things going on in different sort of Earth histories. And yeah, I mean there was a whole... I have a long tradition of my titles getting shot down by pretty much every publisher I've ever worked with. So I look forward to the when I finally do find a title for this fantasy book, it not being accepted by Head of Zeus, and then just deciding it's going to get called something else.
Well, that's very juicy. You have to tell us some titles that have been shot down.
You'll understand why when you hear. So Barehead was recently published as the sequel to Dogs of War. That is a novel where someone basically gets the intelligence of a cyborg bear downloaded into their own implant. And it was originally going to be called Bear With Me. and that was
I
too
like
much of a pun, sadly, for the publishers to live with.
You must be a dad.
Yep.
These publishers should know.
Yeah, it's a long tradition. I mean, two of the Shadows of the App books didn't go out with their original working titles either. So it's one of the I've lived with a long time with the one thing I can't do well apparently is the titles of my own books.
Was Shards of Earth an original title?
Shards of Earth was. Children of Time was not.
Ooh.
Children of Time was originally written as Portia's Children. Which I think the publishers felt. I mean, I still quite like that, but I can appreciate. I think the publishers felt it was a bit obscure and didn't necessarily sort of say science fiction enough, especially given that it was my first science fiction book.
Well, they're both fantastic titles. Shards of Earth is, I mean, it says so much. Simply because Earth does not exist, and we have these people that remember it, and it's quite beautiful, I would say.
Thank you.
Is there a chance you could read us the last sentence that you wrote? Is that within reach? Is that or is that asking too much?
God, hold on. Let me call it up. There's no guarantee this will. I'm messing about a bit with my writing practice. So whether this sentence will actually end up in the book, I don't know.
That doesn't matter. But to hear the last thing that you put on the proverbial paper is kind of a treat.
All right, let's give it a go. So, Olaim cracked her knuckles and took a few steps forward. With deft strokes, she drew a sign on the ground, not even in chalk or oils, just making a vacant sigil where she'd pushed the spilled buttons out of the way. It wouldn't exactly hold if the thing charged, but it would hurt.
Oh,
that's amazing. That was fantastic.
And are we allowed to know what this is, or is this a...
So, I mean, like I say, with no guarantee that this will make it to the final book, this is a factory worker conjurer trying to restrain a factory demon that is that has broken free of its bindings and is on the loose.
Amazing.
Okay.
In a button factory, because it's that kind of book.
Oh.
They need demons to make their buttons. Oh, it's quite something.
I love that.
Well, man, I can't imagine how else you'd make a button, frankly.
Well, I think on that note, Adrian, we've kept you for over an hour. That was a perfect little ending to the episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we sure appreciate your writing and your productivity. And we're really looking forward to the next volume of After Shards of Earth. What's the title on the second volume?
Oh, God, I'm going to try to think, because that also didn't survive contact with the publishers. Oh God, it's gone completely out of my head. I think I'll have to say you'll have to find out, because I mean, my mind has gone completely blank on what we ended up calling it, and because it's not the original thing, I can't just look it up on my computer.
And are we referring to this as the Shards of Earth trilogy? Is that it's in stone?
The final architecture is the.
Right, the final architect. Right. Okay. Well, that's just fantastic. I think we're all looking forward to it, and we've got listeners looking forward to it. There's a lot of people looking forward to what you're doing, Adrian. You're kind of taking sci-fi by storm. When I really think of the new authors, of course, we like a lot of stuff coming out, but you have really impacted the space in a very big way, and we're very appreciative of what you do.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, I think we're in a bit of a golden age of really good imaginative science fiction. I'm just very happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, we are as well.
Agreed.
And maybe we can connect again and get you on for in a year from now or something like that. If you enjoyed yourself today, even if you didn't enjoy yourself today, we'll force you back on.
Well, thank you again.
No, thank you very much for having me on.
We definitely want to try and get Adrian back on the show, because he's writing so much and it's all so good. So if you have not read Adrian's work, please go check it out. And then if you have, you know what we're talking about here. So next episode, we are talking about Shards of Earth. Join us for that. Thank you for joining us for this one. Until next time.